Hey everyone, I'm John Oden on the development team here at Boson Software. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new demo lab. This is demo lab number 2, NetSim Topology. Okay, let's get started. Here is Boson NetSim. Let me first review the 3 areas of interest in the NetSim window that we're going to be working in. First, over on the left is the lab tree. This is a list of all of the labs that are included with the product. Next is the lab documentation window up here at the top. This contains the lab documentation for the currently loaded lab. And then down below, the console window, which provides you with command line access to each of the devices in the lab. Back over to the lab tree for a moment, you can see that there are a few demo labs here. There used to only be one, and we've added some new demo labs, and the one that's going to be the topic of this video is demo lab number 2. And in this lab, we're going to learn about a feature of Boson NetSim that sets NetSim apart from all of the other simulators that are out there. What this feature allows you to do is to design your own network topologies and configure the devices in those topologies the way you want. So you can create your own labs. You're not limited just to the lab exercises that are included with the product. So let's go ahead and load up demo lab number 2. And to do that, we just go to the lab tree and give it a double click. Now that the lab is loaded, one of the first things that we're going to want to do is to optimize our desktop space. Now we're a little bit limited here by the recording dimensions of this video, so on a real monitor you'll be able to spread things out a little bit more. I'm at 1280 pixels by 720 pixels here in this video, but the first thing that I want to show you how to do is to take the lab documentation and pop this window out into an external viewer. So to do that, we're going to go up onto the main menu and click on Lab Text and then Launch External Viewer. And when I do that, you can see that the lab documentation is opened up into its own window that I can drag around independently of the rest of NetSim. So if you have a dual monitor setup, as I do here, you can drag the lab documentation off to another monitor, and I'd recommend that you do that now so that you'll be able to follow along as we work through this lab. I'm going to bring that documentation back just for a moment, just to tell you a little bit about the topology. This is the lab topology. This is a representation of the lab topology in the lab documentation, and it shows you all of the devices and how they're connected together. Now if we go back over into NetSim and look at these tabs across the top, we can see that we've got several. We've got the lab instructions tab, which contains our lab documentation that's now off in another window. And next to that, we've got something called the Netmap. Let's go ahead and click on that and have a look. What is the Netmap? Well, the Netmap is a clickable, interactive canvas that will allow you to manipulate the simulated network topology. You can see that by just clicking on the canvas background here, I can drag it around so that I can see all of the parts. I can hover over any device and I can examine the statistics for that device. I can see the device type and the device name and the interfaces that that device has. This topology has, of course, already been created. It was part of the lab when you loaded it. But what we're going to see how to do is how that you can use the Netmap to create your own topologies. Let's take a look at our lab documentation. And in the introduction section, notice that we're not going to be using any iOS commands in this lab. This lab is going to be all about creating a topology. So let's go ahead and get started doing that. First thing I'm going to do is to rearrange my screen just a little bit so that I can have some more room to work. We've got the lab loaded, so we can put the lab tree away for now. And notice that there's an arrow up here that I can click, and I can just collapse the lab tree. Another thing that we can do to save space is to use these sliding panes to change the balance between the amount of screen space that's available for the topology and the amount that we have for the console. Now, since we're not going to be using the console window right now, let's go ahead and slide that down just a little bit, and you'll see that that gives us more room to look at the topology where we're going to be doing our work. I've got a number of extra topology tabs that have gotten opened up in my instance of NetSim here, so I'm going to go ahead and close those and get that clutter out of the way so that we are left only with the topology that loaded when we loaded the lab. So let's now go ahead and move into the lab tasks and begin with task 1, which is to create a new blank topology and populate it with the devices that we want. So the first step in doing that is to open up the navigation panel. If you look in the upper left-hand corner of the Netmap canvas, you'll see there's an item up there that is labeled navigation. So let's go ahead and drop that down. And just to make things a little bit easier to see, I'm going to take the canvas and I'm going to move it up so that we don't have this one thing stacked on the other going on. So I'm going to create a new topology. There's a button right there in the middle that I can click on. Let's go ahead and do that. And you'll see that we now have a new topology tab. And this gives us basically a blank canvas where we're going to begin building our own topology. We can put that away by just giving it another click, and we can bring it back. You can do things like scaling the size up and down, and you can clear the NetMap and start over, and you can do some other things there. So you may want to get into this and then get back out of it from time to time as you work through the lab. So let's go ahead and begin by adding our first device to this new blank topology, and we're going to do that by clicking the Add Device button. The first device that we want to add to the topology is going to be a 2811 model router, and we want to configure that router with 4 serial interfaces. And down below, when we add a new device to the topology, we can either accept the default name. The first router will be router 1, the next router will be router 2, and so on. But for this first device, we want to change the name to core. So we'll go ahead and specify our custom name that we want and click the Create Router button, and the device will appear in the topology. So looking at our topology diagram, we can see that we need 3 more routers, router 2, router 3, and router 4. So let's go ahead and add those devices now. Add device. It remembered from the last time that we chose a 2811 router, so that's going to be the default choice the next time. It also remembered the interface configurations, and we're going to leave that the same. And the first device that we created was initially called router 1. Now we renamed it to core, but NetSim still increments, and the next default name is going to be router 2, and we're going to just go ahead and accept that for router 2, and then for router 3, and then router 4. Continuing in task 1, we need to add some switches to our topology, so let's go ahead and do that. Once again, add device. If we look at the available devices that we have, we need to expand available switches, and we're going to add a 3500 series switch, specifically model 3550. And we're just going to go ahead and take the default name. It's going to be switch 1. The 3500 series switches are a fixed configuration, so the default interfaces are the only interfaces that we're going to have. There's no configuration change we can make there, so we'll just leave all of that as it is, and we'll accept the default name of switch 1, and we'll do the same thing for switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4. There's switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4. I can see that these devices that I've added, they've sort of scrolled down below the bottom of the screen, so I'm panning up and down to let you see that they're there. We'll reorganize this just in a moment. But let's go ahead and finish adding our devices. Continuing on task 1, step 5, we need to add 4 PCs. So if we click Add Device, we can scroll down here to Other Devices. We're going to add 4 Windows PCs, PC1, PC2, PC3, and PC4. Those are the default names. We're just going to accept them. If you're building your own topology, you could provide your own names in this text box above, but we're going to take the default of PC1 for this one, PC2, 3, and 4 for the next ones. All of those devices are there. We can just see that they're just appending down at the bottom of the screen. We can scroll our screen size down here a little bit and see that, yeah, all of those devices, they are there. So our next task is going to be to look at the topology diagram at the beginning of our lab document, and we want to arrange our devices in a manner similar to what you see in the front of the lab document. So I'm going to grab the core router and I'm going to pull it out here. Router 2 is going to come over here, and I'm going to continue arranging these devices just by picking them up and dragging them around until the arrangement of devices in my topology is similar to what we see in the lab document. You can see here that I have arranged the devices on my topology in a manner that's close to what we see in the beginning of the lab document. So that wraps up task 1, and now we're ready to go on to task 2 and to start creating some connections between these devices. Now let's move on to task 2 and begin creating our fast Ethernet connections. We're going to begin by creating a fast Ethernet connection from PC1 to switch 1. So to create a connection, we hover over the device that's going to be on one end of the connection. We choose right click, then New Connection. When the New Connection dialog box opens up, we need to specify which device is going to be the remote device on the other end of that connection. In this case, it's going to be switch 1. So we've specified that from PC1, we want to create a new connection to the fast Ethernet 01 interface of switch 1. So when we click Connect, we'll see that happen. And now we'll repeat that process for PC2, PC3, and PC4. And there we have it, a connection from each of the PCs to its respective switch on Fast Ethernet interface 01 of each switch. You can always go back and look at the connections that you've already made by hovering over a device and right-click and choose Existing Connections, and you'll see the connections that currently exist for that device. We can see that PC4 is currently connected to switch 4 on switch 4's Fast Ethernet 01 interface. Let's continue creating connections by creating Ethernet connections from each of the switches to the routers. So we'll begin on switch 1, right-click, New Connection, and the remote device is going to be the core router, and the remote interface is going to be Fast Ethernet 00. The local interface is going to be Fast Ethernet 02. Notice that Fast Ethernet 01 is not in the list because we've already used that interface to connect to PC1. Of course, you can only use an interface one time, so once that interface has been used once, it's removed from the list of possible interfaces that you could use to create a new connection. The same thing for switch 2. We're going to connect to the remote device router 2, Fast Ethernet 00 on router 2, Fast Ethernet 02 on switch 2. The same thing for switch 3, and finally switch 4. Now let's go on to task 3 and create a serial connection. We're going to create a serial connection from router 4 to router 3, and that process is going to work the same way. We're going to go to the device that we want to create the connection from. We'll right-click and choose New Connection. And in this case, we want to create this connection from serial 01 of router 4 to serial 01 of router 3. When we're setting up serial connections like this, we've got to establish one end or the other of the connection as the DCE end of the connection. In this case, the local interface of router 4 needs to be DCE, and that was already the default, so there's nothing to change, but just verify that that is in fact the case. Now click Connect, and we've built a serial connection from serial 01 of router 4 to serial 01 of router 3, with router 4 being the DCE end of that serial link. Let's move on to task 4 and create some frame relay connections. Frame relay connections are a special kind of serial connection, and NetSim gives us the ability to set up frame relay connections so that we can simulate a service provider's frame relay cloud. I'm going to pull the documentation back over just for a moment and let you see what we're getting ready to do here. We're going to build a set of serial connections from each of the routers into a frame relay cloud to create this configuration right here. So let's start with our core router. We're going to right click and choose New Connection, and in the New Connection dialog box over here on the left we can choose the kind of connection that we want to create. So let's go down and choose Serial, and this time instead of creating a point-to-point connection like we created between router 3 and router 4 here, we're going to create a different kind of serial connection. It's going to be a frame relay. And now let's go ahead and click Connect. For the name of this connection, let's call it Cloud. The number of nodes that we have will need to be 3. Recall from the topology diagram that the core router, router 2, and router 3, these are the 3 devices that are going to participate in this frame relay cloud. So let's go ahead and identify those devices now. So the first router is going to be core, the second router is going to be router 2, and the third router is going to be router 3. Router 4 will not be participating in the frame relay cloud. All 3 devices are going to be connecting into the frame relay cloud using their serial 00 interfaces. So let's go ahead and make that selection now. Serial 00 on core, also on router 2, and also on router 3. Now we need to assign the DELC values. DELC is just an acronym that stands for Data Link Connection Identifier. You'll learn a lot more about frame relay in standalone labs 38, 39, and 40, but for now let's just go ahead and put in the values. If you look at step 9 of task 4, you'll see the values, so go ahead and enter those values into the table now. Now with those values entered, let's check them against the table one more time just to make sure that all the values are correctly entered for each device. And it looks like they are, so let's go ahead and click the Apply Settings button up here at the top, and that will build the cloud. You'll notice the cloud kind of landed way off on the lower left-hand corner of my canvas, so I had to pan the canvas around a little bit and drag it back. Notice that you can pick up any of these elements, you've seen that already, and adjust them so that it looks the way that you want it to look. So there now is our frame relay cloud that connects the core router, router 2, and router 3. Let's go on to task 5, where we're going to save this topology that we've now created. So to do that, let's go up onto the main menu and choose Netmap and then Save Topology. I'm going to put it in a place that makes sense so that I can come back and find it later. I've got a folder that I've already created called Boson NetSim Labs, and the default name for this topology is new topology.top. You'll want to change that to a name that is meaningful to you, and this is NetSim Demo Lab 2, so I'm just going to use that as the name of my topology. And then with that done, I'll click the Save button, and now my topology has been saved to the file name that's given in this dialog box here. Now that we've built the topology and saved it, we need to apply the topology so that we can configure the devices that are contained within it. So to actually apply this topology and load it into the simulator so that we can configure these devices, let's go onto the main menu again and choose Netmap and then Apply Selected Topology. After you save the topology and apply it, now you can configure the devices that are in it. And that's going to be the topic of our next demo lab, Demo Lab 3, which will allow us to configure this topology that we've built in this lab. Thanks for following along in this lab, and I hope you've seen some things that will help you make better use of NetSim and let you see that NetSim gives you the ability to create your own custom topologies. You're not limited just to the topologies that come with the product. And be sure and check out our next video, Demo Lab 3, where we'll configure the devices in the topology that we just built in this lab. In the meantime, be sure and check us out on the web at boson.com. Also, we maintain presences on Facebook and Twitter, so you can check us out there as well. Thanks for watching.